So we're going to continue on now with the word problems that have the most different steps in them. They either have one or two step ratios in there somewhere, and then some combination of adding or subtracting. So there's just a few more keywords to look at here. So here we have a library has a total of 3,000 books. One third of the books are children's books. Of the remaining, 75% are fiction books. How many are nonfiction books? So what we're trying to find is the number of nonfiction books. We're given total books is 3,000. So then this, where it has the one third of the books, that in itself is a ratio. So that means 1 out of 3 books are children's books. So that means you have 1 children's book for every 3 total books. That's what that 1/3 means. So if you set it up like this, and we've got the total books, then we can use the approach that we did in the other ones where we're going to be canceling the books to figure out children's books. And then of the remaining, 75% are fiction books. And because 75% is a ratio that's always out of 100, that tells us there are 75 fiction books equals 100 remaining books, which means we need to figure out what it means by remaining. So in this case, we want to get to nonfiction books. And we don't have nonfiction books written here anywhere. So we need to sort out what all these statements mean. Okay, so a third are children's books. Of the remaining, that means all the books minus the children's books is what we mean by the remaining. 75% are fiction. How many are nonfiction? So we have to make an assumption here, fiction or nonfiction. And that's a reasonable assumption to make because any book is either a fiction or a nonfiction book. So the first thing we need to do is get rid of the children's books because we know that when we're talking about the remaining, that means we need to subtract out how many children's books there are. And the number of children's books is 1/3 of the total. So if you recognize that as being 3,000 divided by 3, you can do it that way. If you want to look at what's going on here, we can say, oh, if there's 1 children's book for every 3 total books, then we can say out of the 3,000 total books, then that we have 1 children's book for every 3 total books. Then, like we did in the previous ones, we can cancel total books. And we know that we'll end up with 3,000 children's books. But we don't want the children's books. We want the books that are remaining, or the rest of the books. So now we want to take the 3,000 total books, subtract out the 1,000 children's books, and that gives us 2,000, and that's the remaining books. So of these remaining, 75% are fiction. So we can set up another ratio here. So we have 2,000 remaining books, and then we have a ratio here that includes remaining books and fiction books, and we know that there are 75 fiction books for every $100 remaining. So when you multiply that ratio, 2,000 times 75 divided by 100 gives you 1,500 fiction books. Because like with the other ratios, we can cancel out the remaining books and we're left with fiction books. But our question is how many nonfiction books? So we know that of our remaining, we're down to just fiction and nonfiction books. So now we're going to take our remaining books, the 2,000, and we're going to subtract out the 1,500 fiction books, and that's going to give us 500 nonfiction. So this is a question that in some form does tend to show up on the HESI frequently. It's not going to be with these numbers for sure. I made up these numbers, but it's probably going to be the same process. I don't know if it's necessarily always going to be asking for nonfiction books versus fiction, but just know that the total books, you need to add up children's fiction and nonfiction. You have to do that in steps by subtracting out, figuring out how many children's books there are, subtracting those out, and then going on from there, either calculating the fiction and you're done, or calculating the fiction and then subtracting out the nonfiction. So go over this one several times if it confuses you, and get it to the point that it all makes sense to you, so that if you're given a question that is similar but not identical, you still know how to approach it.